And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, bots of the serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed, high atop the Edwards Plateau. And we got wine updates.
Oh, it's settling nicely.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Yeah.
Well, it's going through malolactic fermentation slowly, and
Yeah.
hopefully in a couple weeks it'll get done, so we can put the sulfur dioxide in it and kill everything.
We talked about pressing it last time, right? I'm trying to remember, I think.
Oh, I can't remember.
Yeah, well, we pressed it all off, and now we got it in. Yeah, I think we talked about it. We got it in these big tanks.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's still going through the secondary fermentation, which is a lot slower, and this is a more touch-and-go, dangerous part because the wine is more, it's able to, it can go bad, basically.
Yeah. You can get microbial spoilage. And oxidation and all this kind of stuff. Right now, we're still waiting on the barrel delivery. When the barrels get here, we'll be able to put it into the barrels, top them all the way up, and then there won't be any risk of getting more dissolved oxygen into it. Right now, they're in big plastic tanks, and there's airspace in the top of those tanks that they're huge, so it's not that big of a deal, but you don't want them in there for a long time. It's okay to settle in there. We got variable capacity tanks, but they're just big, round steel tanks.
Yeah.
And so the lid, there's just airspace on top. Whereas in a barrel, when the barrel's laying on its side, you fill it all the way up, and it comes all the way up to the bung. The bung hole, which is 2 inches in diameter.
Yeah.
That's the only surface
area, yeah.
that's exposed to oxygen, and you put the bung in it, and that airspace is tiny compared to the volume of the wine. So you're both protected with the barrel against oxidation, and then of course once the lactic acid bacteria is done converting the malic to lactic acid, then we can put the SO2 in it, and then we can go on vacation.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we're waiting for. So this week we had a really long and excellent conversation with the guys from Conspirinormal about all kinds of topics, and also the online Strange Realities conference that they've got coming up. And it was a really good conversation, so we'll get into that. But first, space weather news. That's right, space weather news. From spaceweather.com.
The brand new Space Weather News music got the boot. Back to the drawing board.
Back to the drawing board, back to the old.
Didn't cut the mustard.
So I think this is a piece of a larger story, so people might want to check it out. But it says the Carrington event was not unique. It might be time to rewrite the history books. New research shows that the Carrington event, a monster solar storm that hit Earth 161 years ago this week, might not be as unique as previously thought. Historical documents from East Asia suggest that Carrington events, plural, have happened many times before and probably will again. And then they have a link to the full story. So go check that out at spaceweather.com. And they also say that for the 5th straight day Arctic auroras, Arctic skies aren't blue anymore. They are blue-green. With the fading of the summer sun, the auroras are showing themselves in the midnight sky. They have some good photographs here. And people are saying it is a pleasure to greet the auroras again. Finally, the sky is dark enough and the clouds disappeared to reveal the beautiful lights. And this has been going on for 5 straight days. Earth's magnetic field has been rumbling since August 28th. Says Green, who operates a sensitive magnetometer in his backyard to monitor geomagnetic activity. Man, cool. One of those.
Yeah.
Says this is a result of Earth entering and progressing through a fast-flowing solar wind stream. It is always so fascinating to see the effects of solar weather directly for myself down here at ground level from my home in the UK.
Yeah, that's
Earth,
cool.
Yeah, Earth is still inside the stream, which is flowing from a northern hole in the sun's atmosphere. And Arctic skywatchers should be alert for more blue-green on September 2nd. So, current conditions. Solar wind speed is 463.5 kilometers per second, and the density is 4.9 protons per cubic centimeter.
Yeah, that's pretty low.
Yeah. No sunspots right now. Sunspot number is 0.
Ah.
Yeah. for 12 days. So we've had a stretch of 12 spotless days. And we're down to 68% of 2020 total spotless days. And let's see, the neutron count today is 9% plus, so rated as high over the maximum 11.7%.
It seems pretty stable, that measurement.
Yeah. Yeah. And the graph here is showing, it's kind of stable.
Hanging out up there.
Yeah. 2019 looks relatively stable. 2015, it was all the way down to close to -5%. And in 2010, it was all the way up at the max. That was the max point, 11.7.
Okay.
So, there we go. That's your Space Weather News update, people.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump into this conversation we have with the guys from Conspirinormal.
Yeah, and Russ told me to hit the record button right when we got on the call. And, we talked about a whole bunch of stuff that is not on the show. So we're just kind of jumping in the middle of the conversation when we get down to the Snake Bros topics.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's what you get.
That's right. We had to delete all of their crap out of the first part of the show. It was just total crap, guys.
Censorship. Full censorship here on Brothers of the Serpent podcast. Hope you enjoy the conversation.
Think about archaeological hoaxes.
Usually when I find out they were a hoax, I'm like, all right, moving on, I'm not interested in them. Usually they're disappointing. So, but yeah, I do come across them. And also, it's hard to tell, because I think that there are a lot of things called hoaxes that may not have been hoaxes. So it's very difficult for me to tell which ones are and which ones aren't. Now, obviously, there's some that are clear hoaxes, but there's this battle. Like, anytime you have something that seems to be totally out of place, it's called a hoax. And then, so there's and I'm more of a collector of, the out of place artifacts. Like, those are the things that I'm really interested in, the real ones. And so many, pretty much all of them are called hoaxes in one way or another. Somebody's called every single one of them a hoax, right? And so what I usually see is the tendency for people to take things that don't make sense in the standard model and call them a hoax. And so if, when it comes to actual hoaxes, if it turns out that that's what it is, I'm just like, all right, I'll move on from this because it isn't interesting to me because it isn't a real archaeological artifact.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I'm kind of the opposite because I want to know, well, what's the story with it? And like, why would someone create this hoax?
Yeah. Sometimes that's interesting for sure. Yeah.
And like, Adam has witnessed, he might want to relay this story. Like he's witnessed like actual trade of these type of objects that are pretty obvious hoaxes before.
Yeah, this was interesting, guys. I'll tell the story. I think I've told it on Where Did the Road Go one time. Just to names. There will be no names to protect the guilty.
Right.
So, I was at a conference about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, and there was a gentleman there that came up from Mexico. He was American, at least he seemed to be, and he had his son with him. And he came up from Mexico, and he was at this conference, and he had all these different figurines, look like he called them artifacts, things that were just spread out all over this table. And so my old co-host Luke was with us at this conference, and he went up and he looked at the table, and he goes back to me and he says, Adam, he says, "It's weird, man, because like this guy's telling me that he gets all this stuff from just right outside his house, where he like, he lives in some kind of area that's got all these artifacts, and he picks them up just daily. And but what the weird thing was is that what Luke said was that I saw a character that I saw in like a meme from last year. Okay. Now keep in mind, he's got like his like teenage son with him this entire time. Right.
Yeah.
So he may not know what that character is, but his son might have been tasked to carve one of these things and did, and made it into this character, which obviously is a character from the 20 teens and not from like, 9th century Mexico. And so I was like, okay, that's interesting. So a couple of days go by and we're still at the conference, and there was a rather well-known person. I'll just leave it at that. I don't know if you've had this person on your show, but we have had this person on our show. And you've only got about 300 and something shows to go look and to scour to figure this out if you really want. So he was there speaking at this conference, and he goes over and he goes and talks to this guy, and he's looking at all these quote unquote artifacts, talking to the dude, and then all of a sudden the guy just like, they do some kind of business with each other. The guy leaves and starts packing up to drive back to Mexico. Okay.
Wow.
And this is pretty much the other side of this is pretty much closer to the Canadian border than it is to the Mexican border. So that tells you how far this guy traveled to get to where he was. So I go and talk to the conference organizers, and I said, that was really weird. Like, what's up with that guy? Why? And I told them actually what Luke said, and they were like, oh, well, he's here every year that we've done this conference. He comes, he waits for this person to look at his artifacts, and the guy buys them, and then he goes back on his way to Mexico.
Wait, he buys all of them?
He buys, I'm not sure if it's all of them, but it was at least a good amount of them. Yeah. I think the figure that I was told was like $10,000.
Wow.
And so this person buys these things from him, and I really don't know what the motive is for buying them, whether he actually believes that these are actual artifacts, or whether he's in some way trying to just buy them to take them off the market.
Yeah.
The motivation is unclear, but I thought it was very strange. And actually I forgot about it until Serfiel and I were talking one day about, he was telling me about all the kind of studies that he was doing on people back in the 18th and 19th century faking artifacts.
Yeah.
And when he said that, I was like, wait a minute, I saw this go down just like a few years ago. And so it was just interesting.
That actually,
when we've done recording, I can actually tell you who who it was if you want.
That actually sounds, well,
like a drug deal.
It's possible that it could be.
Well,
like Indiana Jones is just going to bust through any minute.
Yeah, maybe there's some cocaine in those.
Well, figurines. Yeah. So, well, what I was actually thinking is that fake ones are a great cover for a real one. You got a whole car full of fake crap, but there's one real artifact in there. That's what the dude's really buying. And the cover is all this fake crap that isn't illegal because it's fake, right? I don't know. There's plenty of ways.
I can see something like that.
Yeah, like
that's a good point. We actually talked a little bit last night about just a little bit with the guys that are in the conference. We talked with I think David Metcalf brought up the whole Hobby Lobby stuff. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that, about them like illegally selling artifacts from Iraq.
I heard of that. Never looked into it.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, they're like real, they're really big fundamentalists, and they were hoarding and purchasing some of these stolen artifacts, probably from the chaos, in Iraq when the museum was overtaken and all that kind of stuff. But like the thing that really fascinates me though is like what value would something like this have, right? And it also reminds me of like the metamaterials idea in ufology. These weird materials that supposedly have extraterrestrial origin, and just that I think there's always been this like illicit trade in this stuff, because within them, well, first of all, they could just be like investments, because you can always find someone probably to buy it from you.
Yep.
And maybe stories are made, and like the story comes along with the artifact, and you can do things like well, I guess you can't, it's not as easy to like create a religion anymore like some of my ancestors did with some of their forgeries, but like maybe there's some kind of like weird value in them, and that you could flip them, like
Yep.
maybe you pick it up from the guy from Mexico for $2,000, but this other collector sucker who you could sell it to individually for $5,000-$10,000, and maybe they go around like that, or maybe the person with the right story has to find the right artifact to kind of weave their little thing. And it's really fascinating to me. And there's this book called The Enigmatist I'm trying to track down. And there's another book called the Solving the Beale Ciphers by this guy, Paul G. Stewart. They're both self-published, so they're really hard to find. I don't think Solving the Beale Ciphers is, though. But he talks about the Kenningston rune stones and like connects it to these Masonic groups. And he thinks it's like this elaborate Masonic way of, I guess, like transmitting these different ciphers and telling their own little story to each other. So stuff like that is interesting. I think wasn't the Bat Creek stone the one with the Hebrew on it supposedly?
Yeah,
Like
I think so.
It's like the same inscription that's in like Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry or something like that. So I think there's definitely some Masonic stuff too, and just like those new Atlantean ideas. And so the hoaxes almost like fascinate me more than a lot of the real stuff.
It's almost kind of like they're trying to like backdate their history onto the ancient world in a certain way. Like, what Sergio was talking about Haywood before, this idea that it was actually people of European descent, blah, 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 that were here first. It wasn't the Indians or the Native Americans. But it's almost like in a certain way that they're trying to like kind of backdate the presence of the Europeans, but more specifically, masonry too. It's very strange.
Yeah. And it's, I just find it, I mean, if you want somebody to have been here before the Native Americans, well, they would be here 10,000 or more years ago. So calling them Europeans is kind of silly in the first place. I think, it's just like, who are we even talking about that long ago?
Yeah.
And it's so
because the Europeans weren't even the Europeans back then.
It's like,
right.
When we're looking at this stuff, to us, what matters is what they were doing, not who necessarily they were, I guess. You know what I mean? We're more interested in and whoever it was, what we're interested in is what did they know? Why did they build these things? What were they for? And how did they do it?
And what was the level of their technology? So when it looks like there may have been communication across vast oceans, that suggests higher technology than what standard model archaeologists and historians give them credit for.
Yeah, whoever they were.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Yeah. That's
well, and within those structures it's obvious that they would have to know so many of these geometric and mathematical concepts and astronomical concepts. So if you think about like those first surveyors who are mostly Masons going out across the land, finding these places, measuring them, recognizing all of the mathematics. It's easy to see though where they could be like, and the
People that we
the modern native they were around not understanding that stuff to be like, holy shit, this is some part of what I am a part of.
Yes.
Yeah. But I mean, that's sort of happened everywhere. Like, people, societies think that they're really advanced, and then they go and they find these giant triangles made out of stone, and they're like, holy crap. People knew more than we did a long time ago. You know what I mean? But yeah, I see your point that they would associate that knowledge with their own fraternity.
Yeah.
And so they may theorize that, like, okay, did the Masons come here
A long time ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at
And
least
because there's
the
so much
ideas-
stuff in the Masonic mythology about the antediluvian world, it's
Yeah.
like, oh wow, this is the lost civilization.
Right. So what's wrong with that? I mean, to me, that's I think that's a really interesting thing to look at. Like, maybe that knowledge that is the foundation of the Masonic traditions was worldwide long before these modern Masons came and found it here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and those are all the questions. It's a lot bigger. The picture is a lot bigger. There's a lot of ways to think about it. But the past just stains everything.
And there's just, there are assholes everywhere, right? I mean, all it takes is a few people to really, they can really screw stuff up. And like earlier we were talking about the destruction of archaeological sites. And I really don't like that. I read about it sometimes, and especially when it's happening now. But the farther back you go, the less I still don't like it. The farther back in time you go, like, so that's 200 years ago, some site was destroyed, or 400 years ago, some site. I mean, it's only very recently that that this kind of stuff has been preserved, where people kind of, archaeology is a young science.
Yeah.
And really the history of, the known history of the world is destruction of ancient sites or people living on top. I mean, we find it. You find a city and it's actually stacks and stacks and stacks of cities and habitation sites going back 10,000 years.
Yeah.
And the people that lived there 5,000 BC did not care about the stuff that was left there by the people that lived there 8,000 BC unless they could use it.
True.
So it's like that's not always the case, because sometimes there's a continuity there and they would preserve it. But yeah, like the destruction of archaeological sites of significance or artifacts of significance and burials especially is saddening, but it's also just, I don't know, it's what happens most of the time.
Tear down
what do you
that
think
temple.
about-
We shall build a better one on top of it. That's like been the story.
What do you think about those kind of ideas of like kind of the more conspiratorial ideas that like these ancient sites are supplanted to like disrupt the energy grid or to take over the power that they had? Like, here we've got a lot of supplanting on top of mounds.
Yeah.
Of churches, plantation houses, monuments. Usually, it's a city center because and that could just be it's next to the river. It's here, like in particular in Nashville, the first French who settled here settled on top of a mound just so it was just defensively better for their little fort.
And also, if the river floods, you're not in the flood zone.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
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 What do you think about those ideas? Like that it's like kind of this, evil conspiracy to build on top of this stuff.
I think sometimes, and you can see this historically, and even going back into ancient times, you can definitely see that it's a purposeful appropriation or a takeover of a site. They knock down what was, they conquer the place, you knock down what was there, and then you build your own. Whether it's always an evil plan, I don't know, but I do think Kyle and I have this thing, and we say this to each other when we're just looking for midden. We're walking around out here on some property looking for where's a good place to hunt for arrowheads. And the thing we say to each other is people always live in the same places.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've just learned over time that often the place where you find the best midden and all the little pieces of arrowheads laying all over the place is the place where the really old farmhouse is.
Yeah.
It may not
the original homestead.
Yeah, the original homestead. Yeah.
Of the people that migrated here is almost always in the same place where ancient peoples lived. So
because they're good place. So was that a purposeful thing, or is it just the right spot? I don't know. And it may be energy based. People, you come onto some land and you're kind of walking around like, where do I want to stay? And if you want to get not so conspiratorial, but maybe more spiritual, you're like, there's a spot where you're just like, this is the right place.
Has an attraction. Yeah.
But I do think that sometimes it's definitely a purposeful sort of takeover, and you can see that all across history. Knock down their monuments and put up your own.
But it was like the Temple of Jupiter, on top of the Baalbek Foundation.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's, the way I've always looked at that is that they probably found those foundations and they were like, man, we need to build something awesome here, because I'm sure their engineers looking at that stuff were like, wow.
Yeah,
this is amazing.
It was a way of revering that ancient site. They built the temple to their biggest god on this thing that they didn't build. That's really far away from the center of their civilization. That's pretty interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
And modern archaeologists are like, yeah, it's all Roman.
Right.
So who's doing the appropriating here?
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder if it seems like I really don't understand enough about what modern archaeology is like to understand. Is there less resistance to things like in maybe Europe or places where you don't have this like racial dynamic that causes people to be real nervous about things because of the past, etc. I wonder if there's like more freedom to speculate without being accused of things like that.
Yeah, that's hard to say. I mean, it depends on what the past of that nation is and how long ago it was and who they think those people were and what happened to them, right?
Well, I think the thing is like it's really what a lot of and I really respect archaeologists, but I think what a lot of them really don't understand is that looking for the mother civilization and these kind of ideas, like it's more of a spiritual quest. And you're not going to stop people from doing that. And, just kind of the way they look down on a lot of it, even if you're an actual scientist, you think it's quaint, etc., you have to just appreciate the human part of that this is like as old as time, a spiritual quest of mankind trying to figure out where it came from or where it got this knowledge, etc. I think that has to be acknowledged and like respected.
That's a good point. I had never thought of it like that.
But they just dismiss it. They're just like, oh, these people are just idiots. But really, like these are big spiritual questions that aren't going to be answered by an archaeological establishment.
Yeah. Well, that's
because they're just gonna look at it from the point of view just like pure science and what they can prove.
Or what they can claim.
What they can claim.
I'm pretty jaded on the whole archaeology. I mean, it's you want to talk about archaeological hoaxes? Look at the history of archaeology itself. Man, there's plenty of hoaxes in actual scientific archaeology itself. So,
yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the case in point would be the Great Pyramid, right? I mean, the inscriptions. There's no inscriptions in the whole thing, but all of a sudden there's just one.
Yeah.
There's an inscription.
And it's saying exactly what they needed it to say to tell the story that they were already telling. Yeah.
That's always been suspect. Just to kind of add to the point about whether it's political overseas as opposed to here. I mean, I think you can get into some tricky territory. I mean, there's
I think especially with like Europeans in non-European places.
Yeah.
What it's like in Europe.
Yeah. I think like his place like Turkey though, like somewhere place like that where they there's like they claim everything is basically, now, especially since there's such a Islamic revival in Turkey, because before it used to be a secular state, but now they try to say like, well, what was it? Göbekli Tepe was like built by Abraham and all these kind of stuff like that.
Yeah, it's more fundamentalist, biblically based.
Yeah, you get into some weird territory when I guess that they see like they would see the Europeans getting into like, and they're they're close to Europe. you know.
Yeah.
But they would see like they would say that like, oh, they're trying to, you know, appropriate our stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there are actual outliers too that make everybody nervous. You know, Kennewick Man was one of them.
Sure.
Let's see, they've
the one that looked like Captain Picard. Is that what you're talking about?
yeah. Yeah, the reconstruction of his face. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, they've found, well, I mean, some of there have been red-haired people found down in South America that made people nervous. And red-haired people had found in China that made people nervous. And so those things are always interesting, and they're kind of just quiet. You know, there's not a whole lot of there's not a whole lot of talk about them. When I guess it's when, you know, and this is the same thing with the out of place artifacts. Basically, you're supposed to be going out and looking for evidence of what history was really like, but a lot of times they already have a picture in their heads of what history was really like, and they're just looking for confirmation of that. So you dig up something that doesn't fit with that narrative, and then it kind of makes everybody upset, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine that happens everywhere. And it's almost impossible to tell how often because no one talks about it. But, you know, Forbidden Archaeology by Cremo is an excellent example. Maybe not so much of, you know, racial stuff, but just an example of archaeological finds all over the place that have made people nervous. That disappear into museum.
I've got my copy on the shelf right here.
Yeah, so. The things that disappear into museum basements because no one even wants to look at them because they can't even imagine how they might fit into the model that they already have, so they don't even try. Yeah.
But for something like what you know, what the purpose of like some of these ancient sites in the Americas might be, you know, if it was something kind of more spiritual, and there's no record of the beliefs of these, you know, the detailed beliefs or cosmologies of these civilizations, then, you know, archaeology is not going to discover that.
That's right.
It's going to be people speculating or people practicing their own type of spiritual or magical systems, who are going to, you know, discover that, or at least for themselves feel like they're impacted or have some kind of piece to the puzzle.
Well, I have I don't know if this is a good point, but when it comes to the spiritual aspect of these structures, I would say that most likely none of these structures were ever built by the spiritual leaders. They're built by the construction guys. And those guys are engineers, and they do science, and they learn how to build, and they learn mathematics, and so you can look at, you know, a lot of these cathedrals and stuff that are dedicated to a religious, you know, institution, but the structures themselves are amazing in terms of engineering, and they were not built by priests. So it would be the same. Like I, you know, some of these mounds and these walls and the geometry involved, and a lot of these Native American sites here, I think it would be the same thing. Like these guys who built those things were scientists. They studied astronomy. They studied building techniques. They studied geometry and engineering. So they put those principles into the structures. And as a builder, you want those things in your structure because it makes it way cooler. You know, it makes it beautiful in a way. To put that type of stuff in there, to make it meaningful. And, you know, I would say that there could be a spiritual aspect to that, because going into some of these amazing cathedrals, you're just like overwhelmed. So maybe there was some type of connection there, but it's just kind of, I guess the point is that when I look at these types of things, that's not my initial thought. Is it like, okay, this is a house of worship, or this is, you know, a temple. Yeah, that's what they're called, but it's pretty clear that the people who built them were concerned with these scientific endeavors, you know?
Yeah, and for us as builders, we've built a lot of things over our lives, and it's real interesting because for a long time we didn't know any of this stuff. We didn't know about sacred geometry. We didn't know about these crazy, awesome astronomical cycles or the magic, quote unquote, magic of numbers involved with precession. But now that we do, everything we build, we look for ways to put those numbers and those principles into them in some way.
Exactly.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think I got Randall Carlson's contractor card around here somewhere he gave me.
Yeah,
That's right.
exactly. It's just like that. Now that we know about all these things, we're like, okay, we've got to go build this thing. How can we?
How can we hide some?
How
super
can we
cool
put
stuff?
something
Yeah.
cool? Even if
I
it's
mean,
like a
is that
doghouse.
not that is spiritual though? And I think like in these old systems, including a lot of the Western ones, the Pythagorean school, and you got all these other examples. Mathematics, especially, and definitely astronomy and science were integrated into the spiritual system.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting for me to think about that because we don't live in a culture that does that. So I often wonder. I'm like, I don't even know if I know what that means, except that I personally experience a kind of wonder and like a feeling of awe when I contemplate these large cosmic, geometrical, and astronomical concepts, right?
Yeah.
So there's something enticing about these concepts that I can see how those, or just sitting in contemplation of these things, these understandings. Like Kyle and I will sit out and just stare at space at night, right? And we just look at the stars and we're talking about them and we're pointing things out and we're talking about the geometry of the Earth and its movements and all these very long astronomical cycles. And there's a kind of a sense of wonder that comes over you when you're doing that, and that is a spiritual sensation, I think. So that's
Like a transcend. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's transcendent. You suddenly feel connected to this enormous, amazing, complex, and beautiful system.
Yeah, and incredibly insignificant at the same time.
Right.
You're just like, wow.
I am this little tiny mite of
yeah.
dust that nevertheless understands God-like things. Or
Well,
something
on
like that.
the most basic level, I think a lot of these places and sites, what you're seeing is it's tracing the stars onto the Earth, and so that's that idea of uniting heaven and earth.
Yep.
And the mounds, in the Egyptian mythology, the primordial mound, things like that, it's reaching towards the sky. These are basically places where the spiritual and the material world are thought to be, to join or be the thinnest, and it's using the symbolism of the sky and astronomy and the earth to say that on the next like esoteric level. So I think that's just at the most basic point. That's where most of these places are. That's why they're having to deal with the alignments.
Yep.
And tracing the alignments and tracing the stars. It's just about bringing the heavens down on whatever level you want to think about that.
Yeah. So I don't, not trying to demean spirituality whatsoever.
Right, yeah.
With the point, it seems to me like when I look at the academic community, and you kind of get a sense of the way they look, or, seem to look at purely spiritual things when they're over here doing science, and then when they make these discoveries and they're like, yeah, it's just they built this because of their crazy religious beliefs.
Yeah.
That's basically the kind of attitude they have. Oh yeah, guess what? They believed in this crazy crap that's obviously total BS, but
this was a temple to the dog-headed god.
Yeah, their entire society acted this certain way over stuff that's completely not true and not scientific. They don't say it that way, but that's the way it comes across.
Well, and they're not.
The level of snark involved.
Yes.
Yeah, and those religious systems aren't understood as esoteric. They're like, they take it literally, like, oh yeah, the Egyptians must have believed in this animal-headed god. It's like, no, that really it has different levels of meaning to it.
Yeah.
Right. So
It's not literal. So things might be more of actual, like you're saying, like things are actually more of what we would think of now as science, but they're under the guise, like we're trying to understand it as religion.
Yeah. Yes.
Because religion and science are completely in our society
separate.
They're separated, right? One is just it's some kind of I don't know non-scientific endeavor, the way it's looked at, and then the other one is completely devoid of spirituality. It's just the facts.
Yeah,
you know, that's kind of the idea, and it seems like, you know, why is it that when you go into one of these cathedrals, why does it create these emotions inside, you know, where you're just like, wow, you just have this spiritual, almost enlightenment feeling going in there? Well, there's some type of connection between that structure and the way it is symbolic of nature in itself, using the geometry, using these mathematical principles that are part of the universe. It is sort of like this, it's uniting these things. So it's both.
Yeah, like you said, bringing the heavens down to earth in the form of a structure. And then when you walk into that structure, you're like, wow, this is amazing. And it is amazing because it encodes these principles that are that are visible in nature everywhere if you know where to look, right?
So like these structures are microcosms of the universe.
Yes, and people who don't even know anything about the universe or the cosmos or precession or sacred geometry or anything, they can still walk into one of these structures and have that same feeling. They may not know why. You know, they may think, well, this is a holy place. Well, maybe it's holy. You know, we use these words like spiritual and holy, but you know, what do they mean? Well, maybe it's that sensation you get is because it is harmonious with the principles of the universe itself.
Yeah. So so to achieve that level of spiritual understanding, to build one of those structures, you have to have all these hard sciences like the mathematics and the geometry and the astronomy and all of that together, and an understanding of the bigger picture to even build them in the first place, that suggests, you know, if you're looking at these mound structures around, I mean, that really suggests that why is it that these people had that knowledge and understanding at the same time that people across oceans had it? Was it shared? You know, that's the most interesting thing to me.
Yeah.
And it seems like it in so many different places in the world over vast amounts of time, somehow this knowledge was carried on, preserved and shared over and over again.
And that's like the ultimate antidote to chauvinism. You know, it's saying that we all have this like root that we all get it from.
Yes.
Of course, the chauvinism comes in when people theorize, oh, well, my people are the root of it. My people are the root of it. You know, and we see that from every direction. But yeah,
well,
clearly,
it's like
it's a prescription against it.
Clearly, you guys were the root of it. I mean, this is pretty obvious to me now that your ancestors are the reason we have all this knowledge.
Yeah, it's those. It's the Aryan Tibetans or the.
Well, I think that I really like the point you made that searching for this source is a kind of a spiritual quest, and that, you know, that people in the sciences should understand that and not try to stop it or belittle it.
Yeah, and so sometimes when they belittle it to an extreme, like it feels almost like you you wouldn't belittle someone's religion like that openly. It's like, you know, so.
Well, they feel pretty free doing it with ancient people's religions. I mean, when you read the way they write about it, it's I don't know. And, you know, like, so here's an interesting thing. You were talking about the mound mythos. There's like an opposite kind of it's like a reverse, not really, situation happening with the Northeast. We just had a couple of guests on the show that were talking to us about aligned walls and effigy mounds and stone structures in the Northeast of the United States. And these structures are all, you know, people that archaeology says that these are colonial. In other words, that they're very young and they were built by colonial
Talking about
people.
like a America Stonehenge. Up there in
Yeah, stuff like
Massachusetts?
that. But there are stone chambers that are just in the middle of nowhere, right? That are aligned to solstices or equinoxes or whatever, and they're thought of as root cellars or basically colonial structures.
Cairns and rock piles that are thought of as just like, farmers just chucking rocks out of the field,
Yeah, except that they are building these giant snake effigies or something, right? So it's interesting because it's like the opposite of the mound mythos, right? And it's not saying these seem to be actually more ancient, maybe not incredibly ancient, but more ancient than colonial, and they have a lot of features that don't seem to match with farmers throwing rocks out of their fields or people needing a root cellar. Like, why would you align your root cellar to, like the solstice or something? I don't know. Or have it point in multiple ways to various astronomical features, but they're considered to be colonial. And that's going on today. That's ongoing now. It's some of these people we were talking to, Linda Zimmerman and Glenn Kreisberg, are constantly working with various institutions up there trying to get these places protected. And it's hard because they're considered to have very little archaeological value.
Wow, that's weird.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, all the stuff it's really fascinating. I know Adam was wanting to talk about a particular book, I think, with you guys too.
All right.
Yeah.
We should do that. Before we do that, I have one more question.
Yeah.
And then maybe we could take a break.
Yeah, I'll take a break.
Take a break. So on this same subject, I wanted to ask you. You are interested in the hoaxes. What do you think about a hoax fad?
The hoax fad?
Yeah, like a fad of the same types of hoaxes in archaeology that just happens over and over and over. Everybody starts doing it.
It's the cool thing to do.
I'm referring to the giant skeletons.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they call all the newspaper articles. They call those all. That's part of a hoax fact.
Yeah, there's one actually. I just went to this place here, not too far, pretty close to where they have Bonnaroo. Actually, it's called a Old Stone Fort, and it's this big 50-acre enclosure that's like surrounded by a giant wall that they thought there's all kinds of speculation. Is some kind of ancient European thing, because there's also this. There's like where they dug out the limestone to build most of it, or some naturally occurring stuff. There's what looks like a moat also. So there's all kinds of speculation around that. But around that was a cave called the Big Bone Cave. And I guess someone found this supposed giant in there. You can find like the old newspaper articles and stuff. But it turns out that it's actually a giant prehistoric sloth.
A sloth, yeah.
Yeah.
So I've heard of that, and what are some of those other ones? I'm trying to remember the ones that were actually like sculptures. There's a few of those. I think there's one in Colorado.
Yeah, there were definitely some giant hoaxes. But what Kyle is specifically asking about is, do you think that all those giant finds, so many hundreds of them reported across the country, were all part of some kind of fad? Like a hoax?
Yeah, I think it was a hustle, man. I mean, you're talking about people out in the middle of nowhere, didn't really have a lot of prospects, some of them, and man, I mean, you could get people from miles and miles around to pay, a nickel or whatever to see the stuff.
Yeah, okay, I agree with that. See, that's a money.
A lot of it is just economic.
That's a money-making endeavor. I
think that's part of it, guys. But I also think there's probably there could be a religious motivation to it as well. The whole idea of the Genesis 6 stuff, the giants and the earth and all that, just trying to go again. It's like trying to go back and backdate and prove that happened.
Okay.
So I think there might have been both a monetary and a religious motivation to it.
So that's what I was going to point out, is that like with the story about the guy at the conference selling stuff, like obviously there's a motive there. He's making money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's so many of these accounts in newspaper articles and stuff where it's just like some construction workers that were digging up a sewer line and they found these giant bones, and then the Smithsonian people came and took them away for study, and then bam,
Nobody makes any money. Yeah.
Nobody makes money. The story's over, and the story ends with something about a follow-up, but it never happens. And then the Smithsonian's like, we don't have that.
Well, then is the motivation something like, well, okay, we found these skeletons and we've heard these stories, but like the Smithsonian obviously took them, but we need something to prove that this was actually here. So they, put the statue in the ground or whatever. And yeah, there's it could be something like that too.
Yeah. It's just
I think it was mostly just a hustle, and I think most of them were like, tricksters. I think there's a big tradition in, it's like the P.T. Barnum types, man. I think P.T. Barnum ended up buying a couple of those too, and that was some of his first little shows. I just think it's it's an American character. I think that because of the age of antiquarianism and relic hunting and hoaxes, this stuff was so big. It was big business. You had, people doing all this weird, magical, money finding, and it just got so much this weird stuff. I just think it was just ingrained in America, that, and people knew of things like that. They read about it in a newspaper article, or they heard of people doing stuff like that before. I think it was just it was a pastime, doing all this kind of stuff. I don't know. I don't really subscribe to there really being these giants that were covered up by the Smithsonian. A lot of the journalism of the time too, was kind of exploitative, and right. I don't know how much to really trust a lot of that stuff. A lot of the stuff from even books like the John Haywood stuff, a lot of his tales of giants and pygmies, it was second and third hand accounts already by the time it gets into the book. Then his book is, quoted by another book and another one, and it's I don't know. I can't really put a lot of stake.
My cousin's friend's brother was in the darkest heart of Africa, and he encountered these beings. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure that pygmies have been confirmed, though. I mean, there have been enough accounts of those. I think that they're.
Yeah.
I'm sure they found some really short people.
Yeah.
And some of the giants might just be some, really a tall ass tribe of 7 foot, 8 foot tall dudes.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
There's embellishment. There's embellishment, and look, Serfiel's right about the time period. I mean, all throughout the 1800s and into the early 20th century. I mean, you had, especially around the time of the Spanish-American War, yellow journalism. And it's about that same time that you get, the airship mystery, and how, there's some interesting, compelling cases with the airship mystery, but there's also a lot of bullshit.
So it just makes it impossible to sift through.
I think the same of the giant reports. There's a lot of crap, but it's not all crap.
There could be something to it, but maybe the account has been possibly embellished. Maybe they said, they were 12 feet long when they were actually guys that were probably 6 or 7. I mean, that stuff I think happens all the time. It's just the game of telephone, if you really think about it.
Yeah, Jimbo didn't have he didn't have a ruler or measuring tape on him. So that thing was 12 foot tall. By the time it gets to the journal,
they were about yay long and yay wide.
By the time it gets to the journalist, it's you got 15, 20 foot tall mummy or whatever.
So this is like the fisherman. It's the fisherman story basically.
Yeah, telephone.
Yeah.
But then too,
the fisherman, he tells you that the fish that got away was probably 4 or 5 feet long.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
You can't see it. I didn't catch it, but man, it was huge. I promise.
Don't discount the whole though trying to prove the biblical stuff, because I mean we're still dealing with that now, right? I mean, look at the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they're still trying to make it fit.
Yeah.
So I think that they were trying to do that back in 150, 200 years ago.
And there are also forces that are trying to make sure it never fits.
That's right.
And you can see that with the Comet Research Group and the whole Younger Dryas, the floods.
Yeah.
All of that stuff. It's no,
Yeah, that's too close.
It wasn't a big flood that flooded the whole place. It was a bunch of small floods. Blah blah blah. Like, you know.
Yeah, the forces
It goes
are
both ways.
It goes both ways, and
Yeah,
not only
absolutely.
that, but there are. What's also interesting about the giant stuff, you know, just before we get into these other topics, the giant stuff, it isn't in just Christianity that those myths exist.
True.
Like, you'd be hard pressed to find a culture that didn't talk about giants in some form.
Yeah, some kind of heroes or big, you know, or
Yeah.
half god, half man.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Demigods.
it is ubiquitous across, you know, human culture and mythology and legend. Native Americans talk about them, and the little people. They talked about giants and tiny people. So we're fascinated with all the stories because I do agree that, you know, there's probably a lot of hoaxing, but at the same time, it isn't just people trying to confirm biblical crap or people doing hoaxes, because the stories are too widespread to totally ignore. So that's I think that's kind of our outlook on most of these ancient myths and stuff. Like, yeah, it gets embedded in religion and then it gets weird, but still,
I think
there's something in there.
I think that there's probably something to some of it. Yeah. I think that there's definitely a root to the mythology.
Yeah.
There's a truth to the mythology, as there usually is.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's plenty of room for healthy speculation, and it shouldn't be discouraged. And like I said, most of this I think is really more of a spiritual quest and using archaeological methods.
Yep. That's a good point. All right, let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and talk about
Snakes.
Gods of Eden and the conference.
Cool.
Cool.
All right.